Welcome back to the School of Whispers podcast. That was a lovely, much needed little break, and now we are coming in hot with a podcast that walks us through 1.9 million years of human history. This week on the show, we have archaeologist and anthropologist Bianca Book. Bianca studied southeastern archaeology and has a specialization in bioarchaeology, which is human remains, and she also has a special interest in foodways. She is one of my oldest, dearest friends and also a listener of the show, so this feels like a really special episode. Highlights from this episode. We go through the ancient history of our ancestors, Homo erectus, Homo sapiens, the Neanderthals, as well as a little bit, but not too much, into the Denisovans. We talk about the evolution and adaptation of certain physical characteristics according to our environment, the mystery and various theories behind cave art and their possible connection with manifestation and shamanism, and indigenous rituals based around blood sacrifice, plant medicine such as cacao, and purging. Personally, I am just such a history nerd, always been, always will be, and getting to listen to Bianca share her wealth of knowledge, and really this is just scratching the surface, it felt like such a treat. One message that really came through often was that in order to know where we're going as a species, I think it's so valuable to know where we've been and to really hold an appreciation of the development of the human species as a whole. If you would like to learn more from Bianca, follow her journey, and connect, you can find all of her information in the show notes. Welcome to the School of Whispers podcast. This is your host, Stephanie. I'm a licensed acupuncture physician and herbalist with a background in psychology, health sciences, and exercise physiology. Within my own spiritual awakening, I found myself learning pivotal lessons when I got myself to be in silence. Within that silence, the whispers came through. This is my sacred space of vulnerable storytelling where my guests and I share about the magic that comes from a life of following these whispers. I'm grateful you made it here, and I hope this show inspires you to live a life of following your own whispers. Let's get into the show. Miss Bianca Book, my good friend,
Hello.
my favorite. You're not a historian. What?
I'm an archaeologist.
My favorite archaeologist. Beat Indiana Jones. He's not nearly as hot as you are, anyways.
No, he's not. Well, he might be.
He used to be. He used to be. Well, I want to give you a warm welcome to the show. And I want to give you the floor to share with the listener who you are, your backgrounds, your passions, and I love asking people, what do they stand for?
Hmm. That's that's a solid question. I'll start with my name. So my name is Bianca Book, and Stephanie's one of my oldest and dearest friends. We grew up together. I am a southeastern archaeologist. So meaning I study the history of man primarily within the southeastern United States, and I have a specialization within bioarchaeology. So my specialization is within human remains specifically. Let's see. I'm fascinated by not only history, but by foodways, which is how culture and food intermingle, which is like a really fascinating subset of anthropology. So because I'm an archaeologist, I'm also an anthropologist. Let me just preface that. That might get a little confusing. All archaeologists are also anthropologists. So I'm fascinated by culture, history, you know, foodways, I'm also interested in osteology and in European archaeology as well. But I wouldn't dare say I have any kind of specialization in European archaeology. But I'm also interested in evolution, a wide breadth of interests in my field. What do I stand for? Hmm, that's a wonderful question. I stand for, huh, trying desperately to find one's happiness. Um, I think that's so important. I think that gets lost often in people's, life is just so busy and it's so hectic, and you've got, people to please and things to prove. But I stand for finding one's happiness and one's peace, which is, I'm on that journey just like most people. And I'm struggling on that journey just like a lot of people. And but I'm making moves to try and find that, and to love myself and to be happy with just myself, in silence. I just want to be happy with myself. So I suppose that's what I stand for at the moment. But yeah, that's a constant in my life.
Thank you for sharing that. Thank you for your honesty.
Thank you.
I, you know, so many kids, while you were saying this, so many kids, what do you want to be when you grow up? I want to be an archaeologist. I want to look
Mhm.
at bones. And you're one of the few people who have followed through with that. And I remember when we were younger and you saying this, and like your mom, my mom, everyone being like, how is Bianca gonna do this? Does she even know what this really is? But you did it. You did it. And I'm
I
so
did.
proud of you. And I was wondering, what triggered this interest?
That's a wonderful question, but something I've been asking myself as I go throughout my career. As far back as I could remember, it is like the only constant that I ever had in my life in regards to what I wanted to be. I always wanted to be an archaeologist. Sure, sometimes I also wanted to be a doctor and an astronaut and a princess. I wanted to be Britney Spears at one point. But I
Now we
also,
don't.
maybe not, but I also always wanted to be an archaeologist. I think it was just, I think my parents exposed me to a wonderful education at a young age. Stephanie and we went to the same school, great education. I think that probably played a role in things, but honestly, it's just like this inherent passion for history and mankind that I've always had, and culture. I was a very odd little girl. As you can probably imagine, that's probably why Stephanie and I got along so well.
Okay.
But yeah, this is all I've ever wanted. And, this is something that I always thought was going to bring me happiness. So I followed it through from being, 5 years old. And now I'm 28 and I did it. And I got my master's in it. And though my industry is really rough, I never regret, the decisions that I made to become an archaeologist. It's the love of my life. And I know that because I'll walk into a museum and I'll burst into tears because it's it's so embarrassing, but it's so beautiful to me. It's really all I've ever wanted. Yeah, I don't know what instigated that. Really, it's just like I was born that way.
Ah, it gives me chills. It's so beautiful.
Thank you.
Like I can't help but wonder, do you feel like a source of, what you said you stand for, like this pursuit of happiness, would you say that understanding where we've been and where we've come from has been a piece of that journey?
That is a great question. I think you really hit the nail on the head. For some reason, I crave knowing where my heritage is from and where like I come from. And I think it gives me, for some reason, it gives me like a peace of mind to know who came before me, and I value that person. I value history. I value all those who walked before me, my mother, my grandmother, my great grandmother. It goes on and on and on. And I think of them as individuals, and I want to learn from them. I think most anthropologists feel this way. Yeah, it gives me peace, and yeah, peace brings me happiness. So that was a very intuitive question.
Well, as you're saying that, I just kept on feeling like a little chills. I'm like, thank you to the ancestors.
Definitely.
Well, let's start to segue into our topic. When we did our pre-call to just figure out what we wanted to do, gosh, the way you weaved the story of the beginning of mankind was really, it did something for me. I guess it's like it's written in our DNA
Yes.
to crave this story and to feel the resonance with it. So let's let the listener feel that as you let's get into the beginning of mankind.
Okay, let's get started. So, people, you can write entire books teaching entire college courses on the history of man. For this discussion, let's parcel it down to Homo erectus and their evolution into Homo sapiens and our other hominin cousins. So, Homo erectus, that's the upright man. They originated in Africa. All of mankind
I'm
originated in
I'm
Africa.
so sorry. I also want to say mankind and womankind. Okay, now
Yes,
yes.
people kind. Yeah.
Yes.
All walks of life. I'm so used to it being taught this way. And I was, when
I
I taught,
know. But anyways,
there
I'm
we
so
go.
sorry to interrupt.
You're fine. So, Homo erectus in Africa, there was about 1.9 million years ago a mass exodus out of Africa, with Homo erectus traveling into Europe and traveling into Asia. So, this took place within the Horn of Africa, which is where Djibouti and Yemen kind of straddle the Gulf of Aden, but it also took place in the Levant region, which is where Israel and Egypt connect with each other. So there's this mass exodus. And so these populations of Homo erectus were populating Asia, specifically Siberia, and then also Europe, like France, Italy, Portugal, those regions. So over time, you would imagine that these populations kind of became isolated and they began to adapt to their specific environments in Asia, in Africa, because of course there were still populations of Homo erectus in Africa, and then within Europe. And so think of Darwin's finches. Over time, over 1.5 years, you began to weed out those who were less adapted to the environment in which they were living in. And so over time, the entire populations began to take on different characteristics that would make them, more capable, more able to live in which the environment that they were inhabiting. So over about 1.5 years, the Homo erectus population that stayed in Africa, they evolved into Homo sapiens. And the Homo erectus population that was in Asia evolved into Denisovans. A little just footnote here. I won't be able to talk in depth about Denisovans because they were only discovered in 2008, and only about maybe less than a dozen bones have been discovered: a mandible, a phalanx, and then potentially a rib. So there's still a lot of studying that needs to be done there, but we do know that they exist and their DNA is in modern human DNA. So back to the main plot. And then in Europe, the Homo erectus population evolved into Neanderthals. So why would these three Homo erectus populations evolve so differently, which we did? And we'll get into the characteristics. It's because the environment of Siberia and Europe in the Pleistocene, which is the last ice age, it's another footnote, over millions of years, the world goes through patterns of ice age, glacial maximas, and then warming events. So it is natural and it repeatedly happens. So our last ice age is called the Pleistocene. So Europe and Asia are absolutely, they're tundras. They're freezing cold. It's the ice age. But in Africa, though it's still the ice age, it's still a warmer climate, like it is today. Africa's quite warm, and the environments themselves were different. So in Africa, you have these large valleys, prairie land. You have tall grasses, a lot of sun exposure. But then in Europe, you have like mountainous regions. You've got quite a few different landscapes going on, and it is once again tundra. And as you can imagine, Siberia is still freezing cold today. It is, it's snowing constantly, a pretty desolate landscape in some regions, not all. So these populations evolved quite differently. So now let's go into how they evolved. what did early man and woman in Africa look like? And what did Neanderthals look like? Once again, can't speak too much about the Denisovans. We're not quite sure what they look like, but they probably resembled Neanderthals, being that their environments were quite similar. So early Homo sapiens in Africa, gracile, thin, taller, dark skin because of that sunlight and that open prairie land. They want to reflect the sun. You know, they don't want to damage, their folate would get damaged with too much vitamin D. And then the Neanderthals, they're stocky, they're shorter, they're burly, they're meaty individuals. They've got barrel chests and they've got lighter skin because it's quite overcast in Europe at this time. And like it is today, it's rainy. Think of the UK, it's always raining there, you know? So kind of like that. And so they have lighter skin to be able to absorb the sunlight because otherwise they'd have a vitamin D deficiency. So they're trying to absorb as much sunlight as possible. So every characteristic that people have is for a reason, which is just like, you know, curly hair, you know, almond-shaped eyes, everything's for a reason.
Wait, I'm so curious. Why
Yes.
curly, what does curly hair bring?
Oh, actually, that's a really good question that I can't answer.
Okay.
But I can tell you about,
Eyes?
let's see, I can tell you about noses specifically.
Ooh.
Maybe a bit less exciting, but actually this is quite interesting to me. So Homo sapiens in Africa have wider noses, which populations still do today, to cool down the air. So it literally circulates the air. But then if you think of a Neanderthal, and it is another footnote, Neanderthal, not Neanderthal, because in Germany, which is where the first Neanderthal was ever discovered, Germans don't pronounce the th sound, they pronounce it t. So Neander Valley, Neanderthals, there's no th sound. Anyways, a bit bougie way to say it. So Neanderthals also have wide noses. So why would these two populations have similar noses and yet be adapted for such distinctly different environments? Scientists theorize that it's because if Neanderthals were to sweat, it would be of severe detriment to themselves because the sweat would freeze and they could go into hypothermic shock. So they were though they're living in a tundra, they're constantly cooling down the air in their nostrils because they cannot sweat or they might die. So that's a really interesting theory. Maybe not as exciting as hair or eyes,
But I think about eye color too, how my little
yes.
brother has blue eyes and he was saying, God, like I hate that I'm so like because to with my Chinese medicine background, it's like, Steffi, how do you fix my eyes? I'm so sensitive to the sun. I'm so like it
Hmm.
makes me squint. And my big sister who's also blue-eyed was like, there's nothing you can do, Ash. It's just that's just the nature of being a blue-eyed person.
Yes.
Yeah. And I was like, is that for real? Yeah, right? Makes
Oh,
sense.
yes.
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah.
yes. Those individual people with lighter color eyes are more prone to like melanomas and like cancers within the eye. And
Mhm.
that's because they are absorbing more eye. So it's basically akin to skin color in the light refractory and things of that nature. So yes, that is absolutely tied to European descent, as is red hair. Some Neanderthals did have red hair, which is interesting. And that's most likely a mutation that just proliferated within their community. So sometimes it's a mutation, sometimes it's a natural adaptation. I'm sure there's ways to know which is which, but I am not I'm not aware of that information yet. Um, anyways, that was a fun
Yes.
little,
Yes.
yeah.
So where were we?
Okay, so we were talking
Oh,
about the core
characteristics.
differences. Yes. And these characteristics, it really boils down to a rule why we are the way we are. Like why the Homo sapiens were gracile and slender, and why the Neanderthals were shorter and stockier. And that is Allen and Bergman's rule. I believe they were German scientists. And so Bergman's rule is about body size in relation to temperature and climate. So, for example, he observed that in most organisms, not just Homo sapiens and Neanderthals, if you are in a colder environment, individuals tend to be stockier. So think of megafauna, mega big fauna animal. And that's your woolly mammoth. Huge, huge creatures, woolly, burly, stocky, huge, in these ice age climates. Same with Neanderthals. And then Allen's rule is about extremity length. So it doesn't just have to be arms and legs, it can also be ears and tails. And so in warmer climates, extremities tend to be longer than in hotter climates where they tend to be closer to the body. And that's because, and that's all about energy and heat leaving the body. So let's go back to the Neanderthal. They would have short extremities than the Homo sapiens because the shorter their arms are, the closer it is to the core, the warmer their extremities will be, the less likely they're going to get frostbite. And the less the length the veins have and the blood flow has, to travel throughout the body and back, it's short, it's tight, it's to the body. So that's basically the 101 on, why organisms look the way they are in different climates. So now that we have characteristics down, the first exodus down, let's go into second exodus. Do you have any questions so far?
At this point, was it I'm blanking on the word. They loved to teach us in school, but when all the continents were together.
Oh, Pangea.
Pangea.
That was way long before this.
Okay.
Yeah. The continents were closer together at this point in time. They're always shifting further and further apart. Like every year, it's like something like 7 centimeters in the continental, whatever sheets. I'm not sure, but they were closer together at this time. But that was back like dinosaur, like pre-dinosaur. So let's set the place. Now we're looking at about 60 to 90,000 years ago. Homo sapiens have been in Africa since about 315,000 years ago, and Neanderthals in Europe since about 430,000 years ago. So the populations are established. Now, the Pleistocene, so the last ice age, which had been going on since 2.6 million years ago, is starting to come to an end. It completely terminated 11.7 thousand years ago, so quite recently. In the span of things. So about 60 to 90,000 years ago, when the second exodus happened, the environment was getting warm. It was getting much warmer. Still not as warm as today. So Homo sapiens, who are in Africa, they're thinking, hey, the environment's getting warmer. I mean, people are noticing these things. And they're like, let's leave. They started leaving Africa again. I would imagine in the same areas of like the Levant and then, the Djibouti route, which crosses like a small strait, like the first exodus. And so these Homo sapien populations are now adapted to pretty much the rest of the foreseeable world, Europe, which they can travel to, and then Asia. There's no longer this tundra that they are not adapted for. Things are getting warm, so they're traveling in bands into Asia and into Europe. And then the Denisovans and the Neanderthals that are in these locations, they're becoming less adapted for their environment because remember, they're built for freezing or tundra, Pleistocene, ice age. And so, they're in trouble, and they really were in trouble, which is pretty sad. Can you imagine the environment changing so quickly that you're becoming less adapted to it? It wasn't that quick. I mean, it was over thousands and thousands of years, but it was enough where it impacted them. And it also impacted their food source, the megafauna. Neanderthals had to consume thousands of calories every day to survive because they were so muscular. Their brains were bigger than Homo sapien brains. Yes, the brains weren't formed the same. We're not even sure if they had language, though they did have communication, but they were bigger. They were muscular individuals. So they're getting their calories primarily from these megafauna. And the megafauna with the Neanderthals and Denisovans are also becoming they're less adapted to their environment. They can no longer survive. So you start seeing a decline in these populations. They're starting to die out. But we're also out competing them for their own resources. We're beating them at their own game, essentially. So they're in trouble. But not only did we outcompete them, there's also, you would assume, probably some conflict that occurred. But we also mated with them. we interbred with them. And we know that because there is Neanderthal DNA in modern human DNA and Denisovan DNA. So if you are of European descent, like my family is, you most likely have Neanderthal DNA, which I do. I did my little 23andMe and it's there. It's so thrilling to me. And then if you're of Asian descent, particularly Siberian descent, you most likely will have Denisovan DNA. If you're of African descent, you most likely will have neither of these, because if let's say your heritage is, you're still in Africa, your family probably never left and interbred with the Neanderthals and the Denisovans. So you're just Homo sapien. And then we have these mixtures in other areas of the world. It's fascinating. So the Neanderthals and the Denisovans became unadapted for their environment. They died out. We outcompeted, them for resources, but we also absorbed them. So in a way, they live on within us.
I can't help but think of all the stories, like where was there interbreeding from slavery? Was there interbreeding from like love or,
Mm.
some form of affection where there was like, there's no communication, but there was something there. There's a little spark there.
That's interesting that you bring that up. We scientists, archaeologists are attempting to research, how Neanderthals thought, which is something we will never truly know, of course, but we can look at things like we believe we found burials, and these burials have flowers, and these flowers, and like there's remnants, which is fascinating. So they seem to be capable of emotion, which you would assume, but we're not sure how their brains are formed. And uh, having feelings for other people, and like maybe heritage, things like that. It wasn't how we depict them in the media of just being these like beasts that drag others, by the hair, and just grunts. They may have had language because they had the FOXP2 gene, which is the gene that is associated with language, though their like trachea and larynx were formed differently. So we're not sure what they sounded like. Some people have wild theories that they were actually really high pitched and nasal,
Oh,
which is, which is really interesting to think of.
that makes me think of the reel where like there's like this really sexy Norwegian guy who look kind of like has those Neanderthal classic genes of that
Oh,
thick jawline, the
mm-hmm.
the brow, and uh,
Robust. Mm-hmm.
yeah, the beard. And then when he starts talking, he goes like, "Hello, how are you?"
That's so endearing.
Like,
But yeah,
yeah, I didn't expect that.
yeah, basically. I remember when I was getting my degree, we watched a video of somebody trying to recreate what Neanderthals may have potentially sounded like by like strangling themselves. And I'm not going to do it and ruin the chi of your podcast, but it is so hilarious. But we don't know that for a fact. But anyway, so yeah, they may have had culture. They may have been, creating cave art, things like that, but we'll never know because things that don't last for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of thousands of years like they do. There's other instances of cave art that last a couple tens of thousands of years, but most of this we'll never have answers to, and that's okay.
Yeah, yeah, you have to be able to. Is it hard for you to accept the mystery, or do you enjoy the mystery of it?
I enjoy it, honestly. I love it. It's absolutely okay to not know everything, and it gives me a job because we can keep guessing. So I'm totally fine with that. I love the mystery and always being able to work towards something and to, have discussions with people. So many people have varying theories. This is my my job, my career. Archaeologists have they're very tied to their theories. It's a part of them. So there's always a lot of really healthy, sometimes unhealthy debate in my industry. So I don't know, keeps that alive. I enjoy it.
Mm. I actually feel like the natural progression would be cave art. So my first question here is, okay, so this second exodus to the point where they started seeing the mix of Neanderthals with Homo sapiens to maybe the earliest recorded cave art. What years are we talking? Do you happen to,
Oh,
if it's
yeah.
okay if yeah?
Yeah. So the second Exodus was 60 to 90,000 years ago, which is a big gap, but we don't know. And then Neanderthals and Homo sapiens lived side by side for 15,000 years.
Okay.
So that brings us at the latest date, we're looking at like 45,000 years ago.
Okay.
Um, and then the cave art that I particularly wanted to talk about in Europe dates to about 17,000 years ago. So we're looking at like a 25,000 year gap between the two.
Okay. That getting it again, like you said, there's so much mystery, but that does help me just because I think that I want to see these Neanderthals like very similar to the modern human, and I empathize. I just think, God, what must it have been like to all of a sudden
Mm-hmm.
not belong in your world and
Mm-hmm.
to be basically pushed out to extinction.
Yeah.
But now I'm kind of realizing, at least I don't know, and we'll, like you said, we'll never know, but that they were more just animalistic, perhaps, in their observations of the world around them. Because I feel like cave art, like creating art, I mean, making flowers and stuff, but I know birds make beautiful nests and do their mating dances. So I don't know how much, of this. I mean, am
Sure.
I feel like
I
I'm
get what you're
waffling
saying.
a little bit. Yeah.
I
But I'm
get what
just
you're
trying
saying.
to paint more of a picture of how they were compared to when we first started to see a depiction of civilization that's literally written in the earth.
They were quite, from what we know, they were quite different. Like I'd mentioned, their brains were formed differently, so they didn't have the capabilities that Homo sapiens do. Yeah, not even sure they had a language. They definitely were able to communicate, but we're all animals. But yes, I think you would, we could safely say that they were far more animalistic than Homo sapiens today. Modern Homo sapiens are not sure about the first Homo sapiens, but yeah, they really didn't have a culture. They may have to some degree. There's very few burials that we are aware of, unlike Homo sapiens. So we vary in that aspect. They did have tools. Homo sapiens have a much more varied and expansive tool type. I mean, pottery, things of that nature. So art, rock art, the incised motifs on pottery. I mean, there's quite a difference between the two. There's also the possibility that what Neanderthals created may have been primarily wood, may have been something that just does not last in the archaeological record. So there's a big question mark there.
Well, I like question marks.
There's a lot of them.
Okay, let's get into cave art then. Um,
Okay.
yeah, so I'll let you just begin where it feels natural, and because it also feels like we're kind of going in chronological order here in a way.
Yes, most definitely cave art would be the natural progression in chronological order. So, cave art. Is there a question you wanted to lead off with, or should I just go into it?
Well, I guess my first two questions that come to mind is where was the earliest found? And then like what really was it? I know that it was a storytelling, but when we had our conversation, it seems like it was so much more than that.
Much more. Yes.
Eee.
The earliest cave art is most likely in Africa. I can only really speak to European cave art, which some of the oldest cave art in Europe is like 17,000 years old. So I'm gonna use Lascaux as an example to really rein in the conversation because it could be so expansive. There's cave art and I mean rock art, petroglyphs across the world, which is fascinating. But let's go with Europe. So cave art, Europe, about 20,000 years ago ish. Cave art can be found in France, in Spain, in Portugal, and Italy. So, like I'd mentioned, let's go with Lascaux. So, Lascaux is in southwestern France. I got the opportunity to visit the cave a couple of years ago. It is not the original cave because the original cave closed in 1963, but there is an exact replica directly next to the original cave. So you still travel there, like you're still in the midst of like these mountains, and you're like in this valley, and there's a cave right next to you, but you're going to go like through the museum doors, and then you're going to go into the replica, but you're still like, it is an exact replica that was painstakingly created by artists and archaeologists. It's gorgeous. I highly recommend it. So 15 to 17,000 years ago, Homo sapiens walked into this cave, which is about 235 meters deep in pitch black. You know, they have their torches with them, most likely. And they created the most jaw-dropping art you've ever seen. Some of the art is, let's see, think of yourself in the cave with the torch, and it's flickering. Of course, it's fire. They painted a lioness, and she's moving. So when you're seeing it flickering, she's literally like moving back and forth. It's like this like 3D
Holographic.
yeah, that's a great adjective. Holographic art. It's absolutely gorgeous. There's like the hall of bowls and things like that. I mean, it's on the ceiling. They're huge, massive drawings, and these drawings range anywhere from dots to shapes. Some of them are unnatural shapes, like squares. I cannot think of any instances where squares naturally occur in the environment. Imagination, creativity, that is fascinating to me.
Wow.
There's also a hunting scene. Hunting scenes are not actually very common in cave art in Europe specifically. This hunting scene is of a man. He's dead. He's laying on the ground, but he doesn't have a human head. He has a bird head, and he has a staff with him. And the staff also has a bird on it. And he is laying dead next to a bison that is speared and gutted. Its guts are pouring out. And this is my favorite part. He's also lying next to a rhino, because there were rhinos in Europe at this time, that is walking away and defecating on him. That's the hunting scene. It's gorgeous. It's fascinating. It raises so many questions. Maybe this person had a sense of humor. Maybe this really happened. And if it did, that's actually really horrific. That's not funny at all. But
fine line there.
Anyway, so the hunting scene, but most of all, there are a myriad of animals painted on these walls. Some are now extinct. Like we mentioned the rhino, we mentioned the lion. These were once native animals to Europe. Not anymore. But there's also horses, deer, bears, bison, and elk, and probably a couple others. And they're just the most beautiful paintings you've ever seen. So a little bit of context to the cave. It was found in 1940 by four like teenage young boys, and their dog was chasing a rabbit, and the rabbit went into this hole. The dog went after it, the boys went after it, and they fell into Lascaux, the cave. And they're looking around and they're like, oh my God, what is this? And they made a pact to not tell anyone.
But I'm sorry, so how many meters down was this again?
235 meters in. Not, it does go down a little bit, but I think there's like a 15-meter drop.
Okay, I was like, these people are I mean, like, that's fucking wild. Absolutely not.
No, they would definitely not have survived that. So yeah, at the time, the cave was like filled with like rubble and things. So they didn't have that far of a drop, really, if like any. But yes, it is a couple of hundred of meters deep. And so they found their dog. They made a pact. I think the dog's name was Robot, just for fun. And then they were not going to tell anyone. That quickly went out the window. They told their parents, they told their teachers, and everyone was like, okay, let's get some like university professors out here. And yeah, the cave was discovered, and they were going to do archaeological investigations. But remember, this is 1940, so we are in the early throes of World War II. So the cave was quickly abandoned, and people prioritized their safety. I mean, we're in France in 1940. So after the war ended, the cave, researchers came back to the cave. It wasn't forgotten about, and it was fully excavated, and it was open to the public. So for a couple of decades, people were able to go into this 17,000, this cave that has 17,000-year-old rock art on it. And but then scientists noticed that, of course people are like touching things, but also the humidity and the carbon dioxide from people's breaths, it was destroying the art. So for the sake of the art, the cave was closed in 1963 permanently. Okay, before we go into theories, is there any questions?
I am blown away by the bird head man.
Right?
Are you
Cool.
familiar with the Egyptian god Thoth or Thoth?
No, no, I am not.
So he's kind of the Egyptian god of technology and magic and all of
Oh,
these things. And there's a lot of theories around him, and he has a bird head.
oh,
And it's said, and it kind of lines up with what I kind of wanted to touch on with Viracocha,
okay.
eventually when we get into ceremonies and whatnot. But he's equated to the one who traveled the world and helped people access technologies within ancient prehistoric times. And the whole theory is these technologies weren't, like obviously like digital computer screens the way we see technology now. They were plant medicines.
Mm.
Plant medicines such as ayahuasca, psilocybin. Actually, I don't know so much about psilocybin, but iboga, which I recently did, which is from northern central Africa, which
Ah,
and
okay.
it's associated with the pygmies. I don't know if you're familiar with the pygmy people.
There's a couple of pygmy populations in
Uh,
Africa. I'm no,
Okay, then
not
I don't
familiar.
know. I don't know too much about that, but it's just to me like because of this figure being associated with like helping mankind like advance with technology, and all of a sudden this
Hmm.
one of the oldest caves of mankind. Again, it's a big question mark and I'm making a lot of jumps here, but I'm just like that is fascinating to me.
That is fascinating. You'll see like a lot of similar motifs throughout the
Yes.
world. There's
Yes.
similarities in people's actions, whether they're related or not. We don't know, but it is really interesting to think about for sure.
It's just oh, okay. I'm I feel like I'm at a place where I could say a lot, but a lot of it would be
Okay.
like the way I would sit down on the couch talking to a friend late at night, talking about aliens. So I'm gonna stop myself.
Okay.
And I'm sure a lot of you listening would be like, wait, don't stop, Steph. But I'm gonna stop myself and I'm gonna let you continue. I'm just blown away. But yes, please continue.
Okay, wonderful. So we'll get into some fun theories. So there's an expanse of theories as to why cave art was created, rock paintings were created, but there's about four that they all type back to. We'll start with my least favorite, which is the theory is called art for art's sake. So purely for creativity. That might be some people's favorite because that's like a beautiful thought. But I have a hard time getting on board with that because at this point in time, people are they're focused on living. There's no agriculture, there's no horticulture, there's no pastoralism. These are hunters and gatherers. Like they are entirely focused on surviving. Their archaeologists have theories that people were able to, I'm going to say calculate. I don't literally mean calculate like their calorie count, but they were able to calculate if a food resource was worth it, was worth the energy expenditure. Is it worth me walking 10 miles to this freshwater resource to maybe catch a fish? Probably not. You know what? I'm going to go and I'm going to gather those berries that are right next to me. So I have a hard time believing that they're just going to expend energy, time, calories, traveling hundreds of meters deep into caves, sometimes climbing up onto things to, get to the ceiling to paint. It's a beautiful thought, but I don't think it's realistic. So, on to some of the more popular theories, because art for art's sake is honestly the probably the least popular theory within the community. So the other one is that this was an attempt to communicate with the gods. They're traveling into the underworld. They're going into these pitch black, winding, meandering cave systems. It's otherworldly. And they're painting these beautiful scenes. And what we theorize is that they were asking the gods to help them in the hunt. I'm going to paint a lioness because I want to kill a lioness. Will you help me? It's almost like a sacrifice, a donation. Like, I'm painting this for you. Please help me feed myself, feed, my children. Another theory that I think this one's probably my favorite is this is magical thinking. The theory is that they painted these animals because they're going to make a pact with the animal. So I'm going to paint this bison, and in my next hunt, this bison is going to be killed by me, and it's going to want to be killed by me. Like, we are agreeing together that I will kill you, you will die, and I will eat you, and like, you will live on and within me. I mean, we don't know what their actual thoughts were, but that's probably my favorite theory. I think it's a gorgeous theory to think that way. Maybe just I'm probably biased because when I go hunting, I'm like, let me kill you. I'm like, please be okay with this, please. So I'm probably biased. And then the fourth theory is shamanic thinking. So this theory is probably related to communicating with the gods, like we talked about, maybe the magical thinking where like you're making a pact with the animal itself. But the key part of this theory is that this art was purely done by shamans who were traveling into the other dimension, into the world, another world, possibly the world of the gods, and they were most likely on some kind of hallucinogenic drug, and they were drawing what they saw, what they wanted to see in this state they were in. And a part of the art that kind of lends credence to this theory is a lot of the art takes into account the rock face itself. So there could be a bulge, there could be a divot, and that bulge in the rock could be the rump of a bison. It could be the head of an elk. And so they take into account the medium of their art, and they paint with it. So you're painting what you see, almost like it's like the images in the cave walls were coming to life. And if you were on a hallucinogenic drug in like a pitch black cave by firelight, you're going to see some things, so that lends credence to that theory. And those are the four main theories as to why cave paintings were created.
Wow. And with the magical thinking, it feels like the first forms of manifestation of consciousness.
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And I also like that it kind of gives credence to, like my worldview of what I like to believe this world is which is a oneness. We're all connected if we can access that connection. One time I went to a festival. This was like before I really had any sort of no, I guess I was a bit spiritual then. But there's three people at this festival that I really wanted to see. And so what I did is I drew out, it was an artist, a yoga teacher, and an Instagram influencer who was like a dancer who I thought was really cool. And I was like, that'd be so cool if I can meet her. So I drew one of my tattoos, and this is kind of creepy and spooky, but whatever. I drew one of my tattoos, and I drew one tattoo that they all had on their body. And then I like connected them with a vine. I kid you not, I met all three of them at the one of them I met within the first 10 minutes of arriving to the festival.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, so it's like, that's my cave art.
That's actually so cool. I do things like that too sometimes. If I need to hear from my pap who's no longer on this earth, like I ask for a cardinal and things like that. So yeah, I'm on the same, field as you are. I need signs too. I think everyone does. That's beautiful. It's only a little spooky what you did, just a little bit. Yeah. I love it.
We've already established that I'm a witch, so I guess it's fine. And also I love the magical thinking and the shamanic one as well. Kind of have a little bit of a interplay together as well.
Most definitely. They could all be combined in some way, My biggest takeaway from this is with the magical thinking is like forethought. They were planning, or in asking the gods, for assistance too, they were planning, which you think like, of course they are, but no, I mean, you can never be sure. Like, these people were planning out their hunts so that they could benefit from it, for maybe their family could benefit from it. That is just so fascinating because you can really get into their heads. If you think about like the psychology of it, you can see them as an individual, which is like my favorite thing to do, is to not think of these people as just like a mass, as a glob. It's just the past. They were individuals and they're related to us. These are our ancestors. How did they think? How did they live? That's what drives me.
Fascinating. Is there anything else on cave art that feels worth touching on here? I'm sure there's, a
Oh
book, but
gosh. Yeah, no, I'm sure there's a book. These are the points I laid out to keep it tight and together and bite-sized. So not today.
cool. There's something about caves, huh? Like,
Caves. Oh, so fascinating.
I was reading this book on the Quechua, the indigenous people of the Andean mountains, and caves represented the womb of Pachamama, and a lot of them
Oh.
would have to do like to become the next level of a shaman.
Mm,
They would have to either like spend a couple of days or the night in a pitch black cave, or like, travel from one side of a cave that just has a narrow sliver to the other side of the cave,
oh dear.
and they're not allowed to know how long it is or what. It's like a test of character.
Yeah, that would take some serious courage. My
Yeah.
God. I just visited that cave in Belize and it was uh, I mean, it was another world that these Mayans were traveling into, and they carved stalactites. They come up from the ground, mites come down. So they carved like jaguars into the
Wow.
stalactites. And so once again, with that torch, you would see this huge shadow of this jaguar, which is a god to them. It was one of their gods, projected onto the wall. And there was intact Mayan pottery from the terminal period. So it was like 1,500 years ago.
Wow.
And some of the pottery had spider monkey motifs on them. And if you saw a circular hole on the side of the pots, that means at one point they were flipped over, and within them was blood like bloodletting from your own body, from a human body, and incense. And they would let the incense burn within the pot, and the blood mingle with it, and then they would crack it open, that hole on the side, and it would snake out, like a snake, and escape from the pot. And that was like a sacrifice to the gods. And it was just the once again cried so hard when I got in there because it was so gorgeous. And then with the pottery are decapitated heads. And at the very end is the crystal maiden, who they're not sure if it's a male. I'm fairly confident that it is a male from my very quick glance at it. And that individual had their heart removed. Can you imagine 1,500 years ago going to this cave, crawling over these fallen huge pieces of rock, and just being in another dimension? It is the most gorgeous place I have ever been. I highly recommend it. It's in Belize. It's called the ATM Cave for short.
ATM?
ATM for short, because its name is like Aktun Tuchnil Muknan Cave. So it's called the ATM Cave.
Gotcha. Wow. What a perfect natural segue into our next topic, which is indigenous practices and sacrifice, and like why the hell were they removing their heart? Well, that's actually one of the notes that I did, not on the heart, but on blood. I think it's so fascinating how self-sacrifice was so common, and part of it was because of that five son myth that I told you about, that basically in Aztec and Nahua cultures, Nahua is like indigenous Mexican
Mm-hmm.
cultures, they believe that to create these five sons, which were five realities, were apparently in the fifth sun, the first four were destroyed, but in order to maintain this fifth reality of this existence that we're in, the gods had to sacrifice themselves.
Mm.
And so within that's why sacrifices and self-sacrifice were so common with these people, and they would use their blood. Their own blood was like an offering of like, I give myself for humanity. And I saw that they bloodletted from their tongues, earlobes, and genitals.
Yes. Isn't that interesting? I was at a conference a couple of months ago, and this man he specialized in Mesoamerican archaeology, and they used like stingray barbs and whatnot. And they would cut themselves on their eyelids, yes, their genitals, their tongues, their noses, I believe. Um, really interesting, sensitive areas, which probably has a lot to do with why they picked those areas specifically.
Like I get the tongue that heals quickly, but man, the genitals, because then you gotta shimmy your way out of that cave. And you got like your balls rubbing against your new wound.
And the eyelids, that's the one that really got me, was the eyelids. I would
Talk
not
about
do that.
devotion, man.
Seriously, yeah. I mean, death wasn't the end like it is for some people. It was the start of something beautiful. I mean, you were giving yourself to your God. That's a gorgeous thing. That's very attractive. Yeah, so I would do a lot. Probably. I would, you know what, maybe I would cut my eyelids open if it meant I was gonna, go live with my deity.
Wow. I recently interviewed somebody who did an initiatory ceremony in Gabon, Africa, with these different tribes. They're kind of under this culture cult of called the Buiti. And
Mhm.
she, are you're familiar?
I have heard about them, yes, probably in a conference.
Cool. And she said, like these people, they live these lives where everything's not handed to them. They have to go to the well to get the water and get the firewood to build the fire. And like they're doing things, they maintain this historical, I don't know, this ancient form of life. They
Hmm.
work all day. And then in the evening, if somebody wants to come and get initiated by them, whether they're under plant medicine or not, they are dancing their asses off until sunrise. And she's like, this energy of devotion it's so magical because they should be tired, but they're not.
Mhm.
They're so devoted to their God, their spirituality, whatever it may be, that all exhaustion, all need for base desires is gone. They're just shaking their ass for their ancestors.
That's a lovely way to be. Is this the culture that jumps?
Oh, no, no, but I know
Uh,
what you mean. I know which one you're
yeah,
talking about.
yeah, they're all incredible. Oh, that's beautiful. Thank you for bringing that up. Hmm.
Mm. All right. So, yeah, let's get into some indigenous practices that just really stand out to you throughout culture and history.
Okay, so let's start with Mesoamerica since we're already kind of on that train. Because I'm so fascinated with foodways, I do have an interest in cacao and its history in Mesoamerican culture. So cacao has a very rich history in Mesoamerican culture. It's been used for at least 5,000 years in the Aztec, Mayan, and the Olmec cultures. So let's talk about the name cacao just for some context. Cacao comes from an Aztec and a Mayan word. It's probably an amalgamation of both. In Aztec culture, cacao was called cacahuatl, and then in Mayan culture, it was called cacaua. So that's why we get the word cacao today in our, modern societies. And cacao was considered the fruit of the gods, literally. Within Mayan culture, cacao was given to people after their creation as like a gift by the serpent deity Kukulkan. And he also bled. And I think I'm not sure if it was just him or if it was all the gods. They bled into the cacao pods. And then they gave this gift of this fruit that's intermingled with their deity's blood, which is quite the gift. And it was handed to them for them to consume, for them to be closer, to their gods, which is a beautiful act. So you can imagine that cacao is considered to be an elite fruit. And it was used for ceremonial purposes. Not just anyone could eat it at any time of the day, though it was readily available. But no, it was used for special purposes. And these purposes primarily revolved around fertility. So trying to conceive, which is in itself like a sacred event, to treat fatigue, probably in like warriors and things like that, because cacao does have a natural stimulant that's like caffeine, but it's not caffeine. So it's kind of like caffeine without the crash, and it is a chemical composition within cacao called theobromine.
Mhm.
And then it was also fed to those who were going to be sacrificed. So these individuals would have their throats cut, they would be decapitated, they would have their hearts removed. I believe some of them, like while they were alive, they would have their hearts removed. Like the more pain you go in, the more of a sacrifice it really was, the more impressive it was. Maybe you would go to an even more sacred place, the more pain that you experienced. But cacao was given to these people before they were sacrificed to kind of like prep them, like you're feeding them the blood of your god, this sacred fruit, and you're being prepared to join that deity, to go on to the next, the next scape, wherever that is. And so let's go a little bit into how it was prepared. So traditionally, it was prepared by toasting, fermenting for a period of time, grinding the cacao pods, and then combining it with water and most likely another additive. Archaeologists aren't quite sure what it is. I'm sure there's tests being performed and for pottery that's, been reclaimed. And then it was drunk. And that's how it was consumed. And that's my bite-sized little bit of history about cacao in Mesoamerica.
I just went in Costa Rica. I just went to a cacao farm, and so he walked us through the process of he had a classic, where he called it classic. I'm sure it wasn't like classic to Mesoamerica as we're speaking of it, but this grinder to pull out the suction, pull out this, and it goes through all these phases of being just destroyed basically to become more of finer powder. But I can attest, as someone who has eaten a lot of cacao fruit, it is amazing for fatigue. He told us how when they would travel long distances, the indigenous people would eat cacao, and so they didn't have to eat food for days at a time. And what I would do when I was in my master's program is I found this one supermarket in Orlando called iFresh.
Oh my God, I love iFresh.
Yes.
Shout out to iFresh.
Shout out iFresh. Every once in a while, they would have cacao fruit there. And I would buy some, and I would keep it in my fridge. It doesn't last very long, but I would eat the fruit and seeds, and it would, side note, if you eat enough of them, I swear colors become more vibrant and like your head is buzzy. It's quite the experience. But if you eat just enough, I would go on these 2-hour walks and just study the whole time. I did damn well in my master's program, partly because of the cacao fruit as like a little study aid.
Oh, that is very cool. I'll have to use that. I remember going to your house and you were like, "Do you want some cacao?" And I was like, Of course, Stephanie has cacao." And I did, and I ate it. And it was good, but it was bitter, which I wasn't expecting. But it was, I remember I was definitely buzzing after that. My head was buzzing. So I could see how someone would eat that, like before going into a battle or something, or if they're experiencing extreme fatigue.
Yeah. And the fruit itself, which is interesting, is the fruit is very sweet and fruity. And then the seeds are kind of bitter, but almost buttery tasting.
Aren't they quite fleshy in there? Yeah. Okay. That I remember that threw me when I first saw that. I was like, "Oh, it's white and gooey. What's up with that?"
Yeah. But anyways, okay. So yeah, thank you for that touch on cacao. I mean, what's the first plant that I kind of really gained a relationship with in like a spiritual capacity? So a little nod to her.
Wonderful. So then next, let's leave Mesoamerica and let's travel to the southeastern United States. So southeastern North America, which is where most of my studies take place. And let's talk about the black drink, which has a couple of names. It's also called Yopan tea. So people may have heard of it either way, but it's most commonly referred to as the black drink in today's, societies. So the black drink is pure boiled holly leaves. And so it's the holly that you're thinking of, like the prickly holly. That is the only native plant, one of at least the only native plants to North America that has naturally contains caffeine, which I did not know. So Native American communities, namely the Cherokee, the Choctaw, the Timucua, they would pick the leaves specifically. They would boil it, strain it, and consume it at room temperature. So they would let it cool. It's a pretty simple process. Where archaeologists aren't sure if there was another additive, and we'll get into the reasoning as to why they're so curious. But basically, this tea was drunk for a myriad of reasons, but they are pretty much purely ceremonial. And they were used in purification ceremonies, and they were used to induce vomiting, which is really interesting because caffeine doesn't induce vomiting. So that's why scientists are so curious if there was another additive that really induced the vomiting. But so they were used in these purification ceremonies. You would have a completely empty stomach, and you would drink mass amounts of this like bitter, it's bitter, this bitter tea, and then you would vomit as much as possible to purify yourself. And that's why the Latin name for holly is Ilex vomitoria, which is kind of funny. But it was also used for social and ceremonial purposes. So if you were about to go into battle, you would drink this tea. And I mean, it is the ratio of cups of coffee to 1 cup of black drink is like 6 cups of coffee for 1 cup of black drink. So you are absolutely buzzing.
Yeah. Buzzing
Yeah.
is an understatement. I'd be ready
Yeah.
to murder someone. I'd be ready to kill myself.
Yeah, exactly. So it was pretty useful. And so maybe honestly, if I were to have 6 cups of coffee, perhaps I would throw up too if I was drinking mass amounts of this black tea that is highly caffeinated. But scientists really do think that there was something else mixed in. We're just not aware of it yet. And this was drank for thousands of years up until about the 1800s. So it is documented in post-contact cultures, and it can be found in Spanish journal entries when they came to the New World and interacted with these southeastern communities. And what's most exciting is have you heard of Cahokia at all? Like this huge mound. It is
Mm.
like the largest mound in North America. And I mean, it is like football fields big. Like, it is a mound where people manually moved dirt to make this mound. It was a city, not even just like a village. It was a city, and the people mysteriously disappeared. But that's a whole other. There's theories that you can fall down rabbit holes. But basically, to tie it back to the black drink, there are vessels at Cahokia, which is located in Illinois, that have remnants of holly within them, and so they've been tested, and that's how we know what they are. But holly has a really rich history, just like cacao does in Mesoamerica, which is something you see probably every day and you don't think twice about. But that is a food way, that is an ingredient that is integral to southeastern Native American communities.
Which do you know the name of the tribes? Which
Yeah. Primarily in within the southeast, because this is primarily a southeastern drink. It was the Timucua, the Choctaw, and the Cherokee, and I'm sure there were others.
cool. I can't help but think, just tying this with something I meant to say when we were talking about the sacrifices within the Aztec, is that it was an honor. Like violence
Mm-hmm.
was of or violence and death was of the greatest honor. And here we are in this situation where there's not as much violence going on, but what somebody in our generation would call self-mutilation.
Yes.
I practice combo often, which is a secretion from a frog, and what you do is you burn the topmost layer of your skin. You do it for the peptides, but there is an event often where you will vomit because your body's like, what is this foreign substance you put in me? Like combo doesn't make you vomit; it's the histamine reaction that your body's like, the fuck is this?
Oh.
And your body starts to purge. But if you want to look at it in a spiritual aspect, it is you're purging, whether it's through sweating, vomiting, diarrhea, shaking. You are purging panema, evil eye, things that don't serve you. And my sister saw the dots on my arms, and one of my sisters was like, that's self-mutilation. And I was like, it's not. But we were just kind of having a back and forth. She was like, look, this is how like I see, like this is the culture I'm from. I know you're working with other cultures, but you're self-mutilating. And so it became a whole thing where I was like, bitch, I'm not. But it's so interesting how within these indigenous tribes, pain was a part of purification. It makes me feel like
Mhm.
through the history of mankind, like we're a pleasure-driven society, and we seek out pain in other ways, I think.
That's a, yeah, that's a pretty interesting view. I honestly didn't really think of it that way. Yeah, I guess you could say we're borderline hedonistic now. Like we don't hurt ourselves at all. Yeah, I think there's something to that for sure. I can definitely see the theme throughout some of our discussions today, where it is definitely painstaking, and that brought you closer to God. I hope no one's listening to this and is like, oh my God, I'm going to go cut my eyelids open.
Oh yeah. Please,
Yeah,
we do not
don't do that.
condone.
But no, that's a very interesting observation that I didn't see that.
Yeah, and I don't look at the black drink practice of drinking so much that you throw up. I don't see that as self-mutilation. I think that's just a word you could put on it. And I don't necessarily, I'm sure they wouldn't have said it's pain. It's sensation.
Discomfort.
Yeah,
Okay.
sensation brings you for them closer to God. And I could see, I'm not condoning self-harm by any means whatsoever. It's just interesting across time and culture how either we actively seek it through a ceremonial, quote unquote, ceremonial means, or we're actively, unconsciously seeking causing self pain in other ways in our life just to experience and feel.
Hmm.
And again, I'm not promoting this, I'm just finding it's very interesting.
Yeah, that is interesting, and it's completely different from how we live today.
Mhm.
So, I I would not have survived back then.
All right. So we got black drink, and then there was one other thing that you mentioned.
I think we covered it all. We
Yeah,
did
we
black
did.
drink, cacao, evolution, and cave art.
Beautiful.
We covered 1.9 million years of history.
Yeah, we did.
Yeah. It's all just a cycle. We're all related. I mean, you pass, you go into the earth, and it's we eat the food that comes out of that soil and we ingest it. Everything's cyclical. That's how I view the world, at least, which is might just be comforting to me, but it really just seems like everything's a cycle. You're made out of like 80% water, and then that goes back into the earth, and then the rain goes into the clouds, precipitation, and it comes back down, and it's we're everywhere and we're everything. Everything's the same. It's life.
Oh, that gave me the chills. Well, I know that you're a listener, so if you listen to a interview, I forgot to mention this in our pre-interview talk, but I do have two closing questions.
Yes.
Yay. And I'm so excited because of your passion and background with what do you call it? Food path?
Foodways.
Foodways.
Yes.
I would
Yeah.
love to know a food that has been, or a meal that just feels really integral to your coming home to yourself or your source of nourishment, just something that's really a food that's really served you in your life.
I think I have two. And when you say coming home, I take it literally because my family's so important to me every day. Like I live for them. And so I associate these two foods with my family. One of them is called it's jambalaya, but it's not the traditional jambalaya of like Louisiana jambalaya. This jambalaya is a recipe that my great grandmother, my Hungarian grandmother, created, and it is basic. As my mother would call it, peasant food. And so it's literally peas, ground beef, and rice. I mean, it is as peasant as you get, but it's all you need. You've got your grain, you've got your meat, you've got your vegetable. It fits like all the food groups. And my family's been making this for generations. And it's something that I associate with home. It's something I associate with family, with my maternal side. And it brings me so much comfort. So it feeds like my soul, but it also feeds me because, like I said, it has everything you need. It is the most basic thing. And you think, oh, it's going to taste, like nothing. To me, it's so delicious. And everyone like in my family are like, oh, when's jambalaya at night? And I won't even make it. My mother has to make it for me. And my fiance would be like, Bianca, can you make some jambalaya? Because he also loves it. And I'm like, no, my mother has to make it. And then, when I have children, I will make it for them. And it's like
Mhm.
matrilineal. Yeah, it's followed those generations. And then the other one would have to be specifically venison jerky that either my dad or I have shot. And that's something that my dad's been making for me, since I was a little girl. He's always been a hunter. Um, and he so desperately wants to teach me how to make it. And like, I know how to make it, but I will not make it. I want him to make it for me. Like, and I'm not trying to sound like a brat. It's because his act of cooking for me means so much to me. Cooking is my love language. And when people cook for me, it means like the world to me because I know you spent time, energy, money, you're just part of your day. You spent that making a meal that I'm going to eat and enjoy. And you thought of me probably the whole time. And that's how I cook. So this venison jerky, I think when I eat it, and I just finished off the bag like 2 days ago, I think back to sitting in the deer stand with my dad, like when we shot the deer. So I think that when I ate this last batch, I was transported back to January, hunting season, and being in a tree stand with my dad with a Hershey's chocolate bar and a cup of coffee, because that's what we bring into the deer stand with us. And sitting in silence for hours, which is meditative, very relaxing. You watch the world come awake because you get into the stand in the dark if you're going to go hunting in the morning, and you watch nature, and you're hidden, and it's just the most beautiful story that just like develops in front of you. You see the cardinals, you see the bunnies, you see the coyotes. I've seen a panther before, and these are things I would never get to see if I was just walking in the woods. And you like become one with nature. So I think back to those times with my dad when I eat that jerky, and it really sustains me. I don't even know if he knows how special his jerky is to me, but I'm gonna have him listen to this so he knows. Yeah, so those are my two foods.
Man, you got my eyes all misty.
I didn't know I was such an emotional. Yes, I did. I always knew.
Yes, we do.
You know that too.
Oh, you are such a beautiful person, and I love the way you see
Thank
the
you.
world. You're just endlessly fascinating, Bianca.
Thank you. Oh, you're such a sweet person. Thank you for
Hmm.
saying that.
And I love
Makes
you.
me happy. I love you.
Okay, my last question for you is a pearl from a darkness that you have either found yourself recently on the other side of, or I believe we can still gain those pearls with when we're currently in the darkness, and you can answer to whatever depth that you're comfortable with.
Okay. Yes, this is a tough one. Um, I would say that one of my biggest struggles in life that I did not know I even had was obsessive compulsive disorder. And a lot of people have it, and it's to varying degrees. It can be, you know, you never think about it. It just kind of irks you when your pens aren't straight. Or it can be like borderline, like incapacitating. Like you can't leave the house because you have to check the door 13 times, or that plane that you see flying overhead is going to fall out of the sky. Like it can be all enveloping. Um, this is not something I would normally uh, talk about so openly in front of individuals I don't know, aka the listeners.
Mhm.
But I honestly found out I still had it because I knew I had it as a child because it was a textbook. But I honestly thought I grew out of it, but it just evolved. And I did not know that. And I found out I had it because I was listening to an Instagram story of this like comedian who just decided that day to share about her struggles with obsessive compulsive disorder. And she started talking about it, and I was like, whoa, 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 that sounds like how I think. And I was like, let me look this up because maybe I still have it. And that's how I figured out, oh, you still have OCD. It's just changed. And that was like a key for me. That released me.
Mm.
And I never really wanted to seek out a therapist before myself. I never wanted to do that. And I did. And this man has changed my life. And that I have two recommendations, two pearls. And it's just the basic, like, please, please, please go talk to someone. It doesn't really matter who it is. It could be a therapist, it could just be a friend, but you need to release yourself. You cannot you cannot live life struggling. If you are, it's no way to live. What's the point in suffering? Just tell someone if you are, and I can assure you, like, you will find somebody who will be there for you, and who will help guide you, or they'll point you in the direction that you need to be. And the other piece of information is quite odd, but it's get your thyroid checked. I had absolutely no idea that hypothyroidism, hyperthyroidism can affect anxiety and depression, the hormones related to anxiety and depression. This blew my mind, and I think it's so important for people. See your primary, get your blood test, because it could honestly change your life like it has mine. It's something as basic as literally just getting your blood checked. Go to Quest Labs, get your blood checked, and, go see your doctor and see what's going on with your hormones, because the way you feel may just not be like in your head and your thoughts. It may be in your blood. It could be in your DNA. It could be genetic. It could just be that your thyroid is acting up and you need to be on some kind of medication to assist with that. So yes, see a doctor, get the help you need, live the life that you want. And those are my two pearls that I just recently walked away with.
Thank you so much for sharing that. We had spoken about it sometime last year, and I'm so proud of you for openly sharing this. I know that more than one person's going to hear this, and it's really going to make a difference. So thank you so, so much.
I truly hope it does make a difference, because someone just decided to share this information on their Instagram stories, and it actually changed my life. So I hope I can do the same for another. And thank you for giving me the platform to even talk about this and talk about everything we talked about today. Thank you.
Yeah, my pleasure. My absolute pleasure. This was so, I don't know if you saw it, a lot of times I had my eyes closed, because when you were saying like, I gotta move my hands around,
Yeah.
well, sometimes I gotta close my eyes to see it and to hear it. And it was just, you painted like a fascinating story about who we are, because who we are is where we've been. And
yes, exactly. Oh, you just like summed up everything we talked about today in a sentence. That's a beautiful way to put it. Exactly.
oh, full body chills. Okay. Is there any last thing, or you feel complete?
I feel absolutely fulfilled, and very happy with how this went. Oh, I'm so happy. Thank you.
My last thing is, if people want to connect with you, I know you have your beautiful Food Origins
Yes.
platform. Yes, yes.
Yeah.
So yeah, if people would like to connect with you, can you share how they can reach you?
Absolutely. If anyone has any like personal questions about like OCD or anything like that, honestly, I'm here for you. And you can contact me at my Instagram handle, BB Maltese, Maltese. Wait, that was my email. Don't contact me there. It's my Instagram handle is Bianca Maltese, BIANCA Maltese. Or if you have questions about like foodways, archaeology, anthropology, you can contact me at Food Origins, which is my Instagram handle.
Awesome. And Bianca has some amazing videos that I recommend that you binge, because you learned so much and it's so good. Sometimes when I like watch it, I'm just like, fuck, I gotta eat some good food right now. I get hangry while watching.
Good. I'm glad. Thank you so much. I appreciate that. It's my fun little hobby when I have, time off from work or something like that. So I love to teach.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode. If you enjoyed it, make sure to leave your rating, your review, make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss an episode, and to share this with a loved one. If you would like to connect with me, you can find all of my information in the show notes. And if you haven't had a chance to listen to my latest episode, I announced in it that I'll be doing episodes every 2 weeks now, because this girl's got a lot going on. So I will be feeling your energy in 2 weeks.